Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today we're going to talk about the soft sciences, and I've had a little bit of trouble trying to get this video together. I was going to put this up last week, but I didn't like the way the quality turned out. I think I was a little bit tired and I stuttered a lot and it sounded very rambly, and I didn't really discuss the stuff I wanted to discuss. But today we're going to discuss the soft sciences and the politics thereof. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because about a week ago, I was on 4chan on the My Little Pony board, and someone had posted some article written on The Guardian, which had talked about a research paper that somebody did, where they looked at the My Little Pony board, and they were saying, like, oh, My Little Pony, they perpetuate the patriarchy, misogyny, all that stuff. It's in vogue right now. It's stuff that's in vogue right now. But what it turned out happened was, I guess that The Guardian kind of misinterpreted the research, because the guy who did the research paper, or so this person claiming to be the guy who did the research paper, came on the My Little Pony board, and he put on a trip coat, and he started to answer questions, and he goes, no, I was trying to conclude that you guys are not part of the patriarchy, because you're, like, going against gender norms, so therefore, the My Little Pony fandom is not part of the patriarchy. How can you be? That doesn't make any sense. So, his conclusion was completely different from what The Guardian reported. It was some weird kind of confusion, some sort of silliness. And as I was watching this guy try to explain how he had a sort of unorthodox viewpoint from the perspective of gender studies, I just got to kind of thinking about the cyclical nature of kind of how these things rise and fall. How you get these sort of very soft sciences that are based sort of on philosophy almost, and they get very popular and everybody believes it for a while, and then it just kind of dries up, like it'll just be kind of over with. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and they all kind of have different characteristics. There's no very, very strict pattern. But I thought it might be fun to explain how they're formed, why they don't stick around. And to start with, this is actually not just related to sociology or psychology or things like that. Those are some of the ones that are more famous because of people like Freud. Freud is like one of the most famous pseudoscientists that ever came out, especially with all the damage that he did to the psychology field. But you also see this, for example, in like diet and sometimes medicine, where you get things where they'll try certain drug treatments or they'll do things, and if the study is botched, then you can get just this sort of weird thing. But diets or dietary plans are one of the big ones. But we'll get to that though. We'll start chronologically, and I'd actually like to go back. Speaking of dietary things, the first one that I want to start with is the theories of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the guy who invented Kellogg's cornflakes. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg I've talked about before because I think he's a really interesting guy. John Harvey Kellogg believed that sex was pure evil, that it would do terrible things to you. For example, if you masturbated, you would grow hair on your palms. I don't know specifically if this was John Harvey Kellogg, but it's the type of thing that he used to promote. For example, he wanted to take silver wire and sew a man's foreskin to his penis, so that way, if he tried to masturbate or have sex before he got married, then he would be lacerated by the silver wire, and he would just be so sorry that he did this. I don't know why Dr. Kellogg didn't think about the hygiene implications of sewing a man's penis closed, but this is what he wanted to do. He also liked to put yogurt in people's butts. And John Harvey Kellogg, though, he got to be very popular not because he was a very good scientist or anything like that, but because he was very rich and he was good at PR, and he used his money to promote his ideas. He just got out there, and if you think about it, this is very sensible. The man meant well. He really believed the stuff that he told people, as ludicrous as some of his ideas were. He wanted to put yogurt in your butt, and he really believed that having yogurt in your butt would improve your life and your health. He thought he was on to something. So he devoted a lot of his money to promoting this whole thing. And I believe that John Harvey Kellogg is probably one of the reasons, there's several, but it's probably one of the reasons why Americans today are still very skittish about sex. Because a lot of the stuff that he perpetuated, a lot of the fear that he inflicted in people about sex, kind of carried over. It's become sort of a cultural thing. We are scared to be naked, scared to see nudity and whatnot, because one of the things that John Harvey Kellogg believed was that any kind of excitement, no matter how general, could actually lead to sexual arousal, and sexual arousal would lead to blindness, hairy palms, bugs flying out of your eyeballs, stuff like that, leprechauns stealing your underwear. There's all these terrible things. But he went on for like this for a while, and I believe what eventually was the downfall of John Harvey Kellogg's philosophies was that he was afraid of stuff like sex, and the trouble was that people would have sex and nothing bad would happen to them, and you could just see with your own eyes that most of his fears about sex and masturbating and everything else were totally unfounded. Like, you would have people who would masturbate, they wouldn't go blind, they would tell their friends, I masturbated and didn't go blind, and pretty soon, well, okay, I won't say soon, because this lasted long enough to impact our culture, but eventually, people kind of learned that nobody went blind when they masturbated. It wasn't just a thing that, like, that happened to, like, somebody you hadn't heard of, because this is the thing that's interesting about humans. We're more willing to spread loss and fear than we are just about anything else at all. So, the very notion, I mean, imagine if you could be persuaded to believe that maybe you didn't go blind if you touched yourself at night, but someone you knew somebody who went blind when they touched themselves, and so maybe like 1 in 3 people go blind when they touch themselves, and you're just a rare exception to the rule, and people were much more skittish about it. Not everybody talked about that sort of thing, but I doubt that it was probably ever that widely accepted. There was probably people who masturbated and they had no fear whatsoever of the entire thing back in those days, even though all the fear was kind of around about that sort of thing. So that fell out of vogue, I think, just because people were doing a lot of the things that John Harvey Kellogg wanted to stop people from doing. Moving along, though, we get to Freud, and Freud was the next really interesting fraud that I'm aware of, who kind of had his own bizarre soft science that was based sort of on good PR and politics. And Freud was a little bit more scientific in the fact that he concocted case studies, but he would have a problem, and then he would have a solution, and then he would report the conclusion to his research. And so he was kind of doing research, except for the fact that he would sort of fabricate the results sometimes. So he would he would talk to a woman and she would have nosebleeds, and Freud would say, oh, it was your penis, and then he would say, there, I cured her. I told her it was her penis, and as soon as she realized her penis was the source of the problems, she was fine. Everything was good. Everything was fixed. But Freud really didn't do any actual study. He didn't do any real research. He just did case studies. So he just kind of was a philosopher, like Aristotle or Plato, one of the old Greek philosophers. He wasn't really any more scientific than they were. In fact, you can kind of go back and you can think about this as being like, for example, the British Royal Society were a bunch of thinkers back in the day, and they used to do things like they would take a boat to Tahiti, and then they would meet the Tahitians, and they would see like one person having sex in public once, and nobody in Tahiti liked that guy, but then they go back to Europe, and this intellectual would tell everyone all about the culture of Tahiti and how everybody in Tahiti was having sex all the time right there in public. You could go out there and you could give the people syphilis, and it would be great. I mean, they used to do this. This was science back then. They would just make some kind of stupid guess about things, some sort of anecdotal, like, moment frozen in time, and they would use that to justify an entire body of research. They just say, that's it, I studied the Tahitians, and this is the conclusion that I've drawn about them. That used to qualify for science. And Freudian psychology kind of emerged from that. It was that same sort of thing where you could qualify for science if you just were respected enough in the community, if people thought of you as an intellectual. And that was what Freud did. So Freud, though, he carried on for quite a while, but it wasn't until his death that Freudian psychology really kind of toppled. And the reason was because while Freud was alive, there was always a central authority to kind of decide why people were sick with various mental illnesses. So if you had depression, then Freud had the final say whether or not it was because of castration anxiety, or because of your penis, or because your parents molested you, or any other thing that he could concoct. You could go to him and he would say, yeah, that's the reason. But when Freud passed, he had a group of disciples, and the trouble was that they all thought about Freudian psychology a little bit differently, because there was no science whatsoever behind it. I mean, there was no data supporting any of it. So when people got sick, you could go to different branches of Freudian psychology, and they would all come up with completely different diagnoses for your problems. I mean, you'd never know what you were going to get if you went to go see a Freudian psychologist. They could suggest just about anything as being the cause, and then anything as being the cure. You never knew. So the fact that they actually broke down, they split into factions, was kind of that's what wound up being their downfall. They sort of collapsed under their own popularity, in a way, is that people got into Freudian psychology believing that it was all real and that it was a hard science, and then when they tried to seek answers based on what they learned from Freud, it all just kind of fell apart, because they would earnestly believe the stuff they were talking about, but there would be someone else in the field who earnestly believed something totally different, and everybody's methodology was crap, so it was all just everyone's word against everyone else's word. Now, going forward, and now more recently, we've had stuff like the Atkins Diet, and this is something where we get into a little bit more science-based, where we start to get more into things like research models. Now, the Atkins Diet was a diet proposal where this Dr. Atkins said that if you quit eating carbs, you would lose weight. This was his belief, was that people ate too much, they ate too many carbohydrates, and this is what caused everybody to gain weight. And this was based on some studies that he did that showed, I guess this is what he did. It's based on some studies that he did where he showed that if people quit eating carbs, then they would lose weight. And the thing about this was that this sort of thing is what you call a model. And a model, like I said, we've talked about models before. That's when you have sort of this abstraction where you're trying to say something about the world, but you don't have all the data. You omit some of the data. So you've got people and you say like, okay, if I take away carbs from their diet, then we have a higher prevalence of weight loss. And so Dr. Atkins kind of generalized this over, and he just said, okay, so everybody, if they eat fewer carbs, they can lose weight. Because I've got this model here that shows that on statistical average, you lose weight when you get rid of your carbs in your diet. But the thing about a model like this is that you find that some people lose weight if they cut carbs out of their diet, and some people don't. Some people fit into the model, some people don't, because people kind of gain weight and their bodies work in different ways. And so the single type of diet is not really necessarily more functional. It's not universally functional. It may work for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. So you kind of got to, you could try it, see how it goes, and if it doesn't work, then you could try something else. But this is one of the big struggles with weight loss programs. This is a big thing whenever you talk about getting in shape, losing weight, being more healthy just based on what you eat. It's tough to say sometimes what's really best for you, what's best for your body. Universally, exercise is always good. But, unless you have like a heart condition, for example. But, diets are this way. So you get all these diet crazes every few years. There's another new diet craze, and people are trying this new diet thing. You can see the old-timey videos when people used to get the vibrating machines, and they would sit in the thing, and it would just vibrate them. And they thought for sure that the vibrating machine would cause them to lose weight. We don't do that anymore. That's a diet craze of the past. But I guarantee that when we're all adults, there's probably going to be another diet craze that's going to come up, and it's going to sweep the nation. Everybody's going to be doing something else strange. But models, though, models are real crucial. They're a key component to this sort of thing. What a model always is, and like I said, we've talked about this before, but what a model always is it's just an abstraction. It's an abstract way of looking at the real world. For example, gravity is a very good model. What gravity does is it predicts how things will act. Like if you hold a ball and you drop the ball, then the model for gravity will tell you how fast that ball will drop, so you know the acceleration of the ball. But the trouble is that when you get down to molecules don't follow the model for gravity anymore. They are an exception to the gravity model. And all models are like this. What they're trying to do now in physics, one of the challenges, is coming up with a universal model, something that explains molecules and large objects like planets, balls, whatever. And so coming up with a model that applies to everybody is very difficult. And a lot of these dietary models, they don't work for everybody, they just work for a few people. Soil mechanics is kind of the same way. If you go out and you take like soil samples to determine whether or not a building site is good for a building, or whether or not you're going to get like a Leaning Tower of Pisa thing because some of the soil is too soft, that's the same deal. You just have somebody go out and they take a few samples of the soil, and then based on what they pick up, they tell you what they estimate the soil looks like in your area. But it could be wrong, because they're just taking samples. They've got these data points. And so one of the things they teach you when you're doing soil mechanics for engineering is they teach you to be able to recognize the likelihood that you've got an accurate model. When you're putting together your model for your soil out there, they teach you to be able to kind of recognize, does this look good? Does this look bad? Do you need more data points? The more unusual your stuff looks, the harder it is. It's part of the whole thing. The social sciences, though, are very notorious for making bad models. And the reason why this is because we've talked about statistics in the past. This is another reason why I brought up statistics. A lot of these sciences, like you get into psychology, sociology, even a lot of medicine, actually, medical research, they don't really require you to take any advanced math courses. You might take calculus, but you won't get into like advanced statistics. And we've talked about statistics before and how it's very easy to not realize what you're working with when you're talking about statistics. We talked about the Monty Hall problem a long while ago. And what this is, for a refresher, is you've got 3 doors. There's a new car behind one of the doors. You choose a door at random. Then the guy tells you, okay, this door was wrong. One of the doors you didn't choose. This door was wrong. Now you've got 2 doors. You can stay on the door you're at, or you can switch to the other door. Now what you're supposed to do to raise your probability up the highest is you switch to the other door. And the reason for this is because there was a 2 in 3 chance you chose the wrong door the first time. So when they eliminate one of the wrong choices based on those odds, then the odds of you getting the correct door by switching are higher, So this is sort of unintuitive, it's weird, and when I talked about this, I remember there were people in the comments, and there are still people today who will argue that it's a 50-50 chance. Just because one door is right, one door is wrong. And so there are people who still debate about this because it's very hard to wrap your head around this. So having an advanced understanding of statistics is actually really crucial to setting up statistical data and doing statistical testing. So what we've got now is we still have sociology, and there's a lot of sociological studies that come out, and we see them come and go. We see them come and go, and some of them get to be more in vogue than others. Right now, like we've seen, a lot of the gender studies stuff has been very much in vogue. And the thing about gender studies is it falls into the same traps that the dietary stuff does, and psychology does, and even some medical stuff does, is that when they make their model, they're only accurate to a certain degree. And so, for example, when they talk about the patriarchy being a major influencer in everything that we do, every culture is a little bit different. You can't really say universally that every culture is influenced in exactly the same manner or taught the exact same things. It just kind of doesn't work that way. So your models can never be 100% accurate. And what I see with a lot of this stuff, especially with more of the things that are spread on the internet, because the internet kind of likes to grasp onto really simple things. Anything that can be easily passed around from person to person is much more likely to spread. And so I'm seeing a lot of things that sound very, I don't know, like there's not really a whole lot of data behind them. They sound more ideological, more philosophical than anything. And these are all kind of like, they're models. And the trouble is that what I saw with the My Little Pony thread, when this guy came in and he was trying to explain that My Little Pony was not part of the patriarchy or anything like that, is probably the same thing that we're going to see, probably the same thing that we saw with Freudian psychology, is that at some point we're going to start seeing, we're going to see that again, at some point people are going to start getting into this gender studies stuff, thinking that it's a very hard science, expecting that there's a lot of science behind it. And they're going to find that what they're actually doing is a lot of sort of statistical data without much knowledge of how statistics works, or corollary data. But it'll be like bad corollary data. It's epidemiological studies when you don't know the cause of your problems. For example, in epidemiology, if you know the cause of a stomach virus, like let's suppose you're looking for a Campylobacter infection. You know that Campylobacter causes nausea, diarrhea, stuff like that, fever. So you've got people who are coming down with Campylobacter poisoning. You know what it is, you know what it looks like, you know where you can find it. So you start looking around, and eventually you find that the town well has been infected with Campylobacter. And you find this through epidemiology. You get people call at their home, and you say, hey, where did you drink water last? And then everybody who got Campylobacter poisoning inevitably tells you that they drank water from this well. And so you go and you find the well, and you test the well, and sure enough, there's the Campylobacter poisoning. Now, if you do epidemiology incorrectly, you go in there not knowing your answer, but wanting to know the answer. And so you say something like, oh, everybody's got Campylobacter poisoning, but I don't know where that comes from. I assume television. And so what you do is you call everybody up and you say, hey, have you watched television today? And surely enough, everybody with Campylobacter poisoning watched television. And so what you do then is you go to the press and you get published in a journal and you say, I did this study and it's statistically significant and it proves that everyone who got Campylobacter poisoning had a television. And so this becomes like big science suddenly, as it gets to be very controversial, because you find that the people who produce television shows don't want to be implicated. They don't want anyone to think that they're causing Campylobacter poisoning. It gets to be a big hullabaloo. Everyone's upset. People are thinking about throwing out their television because they're willing to spread fear, this and that. And so you get the same kind of thing with stuff like, with any kind of sociology, is you get this sort of thing where you're like, oh, we've got a financial problem here, or we've got this area, and And a lot of times, like, different areas fall into poverty for different reasons. Like, for example, maybe there used to be a strong coal industry in one place, but then there was some kind of government regulation and all the jobs dried up because the regulation made it non-profitable to mine for coal there. And you might find that there's a certain amount of, like, there might be some racial disparity. And so there's a lot of different things because the world's very complex. So you have a researcher come out, and they try to come up with this model to explain why you suddenly have a ton of poverty in this area. And they sort of do like a epidemiology, but they do bad epidemiology, where they call everybody up and they say, like, are you this or are you that? Do you watch television? Are you causing this or are you causing that? And they go, yeah, I have a television. And then they say that everything is because of television. You know, there we go, I proved it. If unemployment, television causes unemployment. I've linked unemployment to television. And it continues to go like this, and it becomes more just philosophy, ideology. It's not so much science anymore. And like I say, I think that a lot of the gender studies stuff that they've been doing, that's been popular at least on the internet, has been kind of the same sort of thing. As they've got the epidemiology, where they're seeking out social injustices or income inequality things, and they're looking at data. And to me, what I've seen, a lot of the data doesn't seem very sensical. In some cases it is, but what I think that they've got is I think they've got models that fit maybe certain regions, where they fit certain people, or maybe certain cultures, kind of depending on where you go, or they might work if you're asking a very particular question, or you have a very particular perspective. And the trouble is that then they go and they report these things, and they say something like, My Little Pony is influenced by the patriarchy. And so this researcher, this poor researcher, he was going on about how the My Little Pony fandom was not influenced by the patriarchy. Because, as it turns out, all of this stuff is kind of based a bit on philosophy and personal perspective and bad epidemiology and things like that. It's not really very scientific. It's soft science. So he goes around and he goes, yeah, it's not the patriarchy. Because from his perspective, from his understanding of what the patriarchy is, the model that he's got in his head, My Little Pony wasn't influenced by the patriarchy, or the fandom wasn't influenced by the patriarchy. But someone else, an equally or probably a more influential researcher, would probably say that My Little Pony was influenced by the patriarchy, and that it is bad or whatever because we're influenced by the patriarchy. But everybody's influenced by the patriarchy. Nothing is not influenced by the patriarchy. So at some point, I suspect that some of this stuff is probably going to also collapse under its own popularity, because you're going to get people who will go into this, they will expect that it's a real hard science, and they will try to apply their own intuition and education to understanding these problems and solving the problems. And just like Freudian psychology, they're not going to be able to solve the problems because the data that they've got it'll be based on like flawed models that don't really make a lot of sense. Same with the Atkins diet, it'll be based on a model, and the model may be true in some circumstances, but it's not universally true. And so it'll catch on for a while. You could apply some of these things, and it might fix a couple issues, but it won't broadly fix all the issues that people are actually concerned about. It won't do enough good that it'll really stay with us for a very long time. And I expect that we're going to have more things like this coming forward in the future. In another 10, 20 years, we're probably going to have another big controversial sociological discovery. It's going to be in vogue. It's going to get passed around the internet. It'll be another thing like masturbating causes you to go blind, or the patriarchy is running society into the dirt, or cut carbs out of your diet so that you lose all your weight, or your penis causes all your problems. In fact, I think Freud is contributing somewhat to some of the stuff that they're talking about, where they get into like the subconscious of the patriarchy, like you're subconsciously supporting the patriarchy. That was something that Freud used to do all the time. He really loved the subconscious because it was such a great defense for all of his research. He would just say like, oh, well, you're afraid of your penis. And somebody would say, like, that's funny, I don't feel afraid of my penis, why would I be afraid of my penis? And Freud would say, well, you don't feel afraid of your penis because you're subconsciously repressing that fear. And so you get into that sort of thing where, like, the patriarch, well, you don't feel like you're part of the patriarchy because you're subconsciously supporting the patriarchy. And there's really no proof that there's such a thing as a subconscious quite like that. I mean, there's like instinct, like your brain goes through emotions and everything like that, but you know what you feel. You can sense your own feelings. Like I say, I think it's all based on models. It's all soft science. And it's not just the social stuff, like I say, it's not just the social stuff. It also applies to medicine. There's a lot of medical things, less sensational stuff. But anytime you see a great big study posted where they're like, oh, we're going to make people immortal now, or oh, this is going to happen, or oh, that's going to happen, or we figured out, some kind of diet that'll just make your toes fall off if you eat the wrong fruit. Take this new testosterone supplement to improve whatever. So many of those things will be based on models that maybe work for a few people, or that are based on just outright bunk data. Because, again, like I say, even in the medical field, very few people really have a good math background. They don't have a really good methodology for that sort of thing. So it passes us by. Some of it becomes very influential, very political. Everybody starts to talk about it. But eventually, it falls out of vogue too. It may impact our culture very severely. I mean, like, if the gender studies stuff continues to be really, really popular, then who knows? Like, in a generation from now, our kids will be like, why do we have to... Like we'll have parents that'll follow this sort of philosophy, and then the kids will kind of look at it as the authoritarian thing, and then anti-authoritarian will be kind of like I mean, can you imagine, like, we had kids that worship the devil, I think, in like the generation just prior to mine. I believe that devil worship was really big. I think like Alice Cooper would dress up as the devil just to upset parents, and the kids loved it. That was defiance. So who knows? Maybe our kids, our generation's kids, will be like worshiping the patriarchy, stuff like that. It'll be the new anti-authoritarian sort of thing. But yes, the soft sciences, their politics, kind of interesting. A lot of people get their feathers ruffled over it. I mean, it's sort of serious, but in the same way, it's also not very serious, because it's just something that we've done over the course of history, over the long stretch of history. But anyway, yes, I suppose that'll be it for today. So I will catch you guys later.